The golden envelope sat on Clara's kitchen counter, its fancy cursive lettering gleaming under the morning light. She hadn't seen handwriting like that in years, too elegant, too smug. When she opened it, the world seemed to freeze for a moment. "You're invited to celebrate Ethan and Lena's baby shower this Saturday." Her heart skipped a beat, then thudded painfully. Ethan, her ex-husband, the man who once told her she was broken, that she would never make him a father. Her fingers trembled as she read the invitation again, half expecting it to be some kind of cruel prank. But there it was, his name, his new wife's name, and their address printed in gold foil, as if to brag about how perfect their new life was. At the bottom, scrawled in his familiar handwriting, was a personal note: "You can finally see what a real family looks like." Clara's throat tightened. The words hit harder than she wanted to admit. It wasn't just an invitation, it was a dagger dipped in honey. She could almost hear Ethan's voice dripping with that same condescension he used during their last argument. "Face it, Clara, I need a woman who can give me a family." "You can't." She had begged him to stay back then, to try one more treatment, one more doctor, but he'd already checked out. Within months, he was posting engagement pictures with Lena, the young woman from his office who used to smile too sweetly during dinners. Clara sat down, staring at the invitation. For a moment, she felt that old ache return, the kind that hollowed out her chest after the divorce. But then, something inside her shifted. The tears she expected didn't come. Instead, a calm strength filled the space where heartbreak used to live. She looked toward the living room, where soft laughter echoed. 4 small voices giggled in the distance. "Mommy, look, I made a tower." Clara smiled, standing up to see her 4 little miracles, her quadruplets, building a castle from wooden blocks. Each one of them, a miracle the doctors had said would never happen. After the divorce, she had left everything behind: her city, her job, her reputation, and gone abroad for treatment. It was a long, lonely journey, filled with needles, prayers, and endless hope. And one day, the impossible happened. Her children, 2 boys and 2 girls, were her entire world now. Their laughter, their chaos, their little hugs before bed. She had built her own version of happiness, one that didn't need to prove anything to anyone. But seeing Ethan's handwriting again reminded her of the scars that never fully faded. She turned the invitation over in her hands. Maybe he wanted to humiliate her, to parade his perfect life in front of her like a trophy. Maybe he thought she was still the same broken woman he left behind. But he didn't know who she had become. He didn't know that the woman who once cried herself to sleep now woke up to 4 little smiles every morning. Clara took a deep breath and walked to the kitchen table. She placed the invitation down beside a stack of coloring books and sippy cups. Her decision formed slowly, like dawn breaking through the dark. She would go, not to argue, not to prove anything, but to stand in her truth. She glanced once more at her children, their bright eyes reflecting her strength. "Mommy, where are we going?" one of them asked, tugging at her dress. Clara smiled softly. "Somewhere important," she said, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. She tucked the invitation into her purse. If Ethan wanted her to see his version of happiness, then he would see hers too. And this time, she wouldn't arrive broken, she would arrive reborn. The afternoon sun bathed the mansion in a golden glow as luxury cars lined the driveway. Laughter and music floated from the backyard, where white tents, balloon arches, and crystal decorations sparkled under the light. Ethan stood at the center of it all, the perfect host in his tailored suit, greeting guests with a confident grin. His hand rested possessively on Lena's back as she smiled and rubbed her rounded belly. Cameras flashed, compliments poured in, everything looked flawless, almost painfully so. Inside, waiters in black uniforms moved gracefully between guests, balancing trays of champagne and pastel-colored cupcakes. The crowd murmured admiration about the decor, the couple, and, of course, the upcoming baby. Ethan relished every moment. "She'll be here soon," he whispered to Lena, smirking. Lena looked confused. "Who?" "Clara," he said, taking a slow sip of his drink. "My ex-wife." Lena's eyes widened slightly. "You actually invited her," he chuckled, brushing it off. "She should see what real happiness looks like. Besides, maybe it'll help her move on." The arrogance in his voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Lena gave an uncertain laugh, but her gaze lingered on his face, trying to read the man she thought she knew. The chatter of the guests suddenly softened as a car door clicked shut outside. Heads turned. From the gate, a tall, graceful woman appeared, dressed in an elegant pale blue dress that shimmered slightly in the light. Her posture was poised, her face calm, but her presence shifted the entire energy of the room. Clara. Ethan's grin widened, eager to see the pain in her eyes. He was ready for her to look small, fragile, regretful. But what he saw instead made his expression falter. Clara wasn't alone. 4 little children walked beside her. 2 boys in matching white shirts and suspenders, 2 girls in light summer dresses holding small stuffed animals. Their laughter carried softly over the music as they held her hands tightly, their tiny shoes pattering against the stone path. The guests froze in disbelief. A few whispers rippled through the crowd. Are those? Wait. She has kids. Quadruplets. Ethan's jaw tensed. The smug smile that had stayed plastered on his face all afternoon finally cracked. He blinked as if trying to process what he was seeing. Lena's polite smile faltered, and her grip on Ethan's arm tightened. Clara stopped at the edge of the crowd, her eyes briefly meeting Ethan's. Sorry we're late, she said, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight. It's hard getting all 4 ready at once. The children giggled, clutching at her skirt, looking up at her with adoration. For a moment, time hung still. The music faded into a distant hum, and everyone's eyes darted between Ethan and Clara. His face flushed red, a mixture of shock and humiliation twisting his features. Lena, trying to recover, approached with an awkward smile. You have such beautiful children, she managed to say. Clara smiled softly. Thank you. They're my whole world. Her gaze flicked briefly toward Ethan, her meaning sharp without a single cruel word. The tension was thick enough to taste. Ethan cleared his throat, forcing a chuckle. Wow, quadruplets, huh? Didn't think that was possible. Clara's eyes sparkled, but her tone remained composed. Neither did I. Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? Guests began murmuring again, some exchanging knowing looks. A few even smiled admiringly at Clara. The sympathy that once belonged to Ethan and Lena began quietly shifting toward her. Ethan could feel the balance of power slipping through his fingers like sand. Clara turned to her children, adjusting the bow on one daughter's dress. Go say hello, she encouraged gently. The children shyly waved at the crowd, their innocent smiles melting even the coldest hearts in the room. As Clara walked further in, heads turned to follow her. She wasn't the broken woman Ethan remembered. She was radiant, glowing with self-assurance and peace. And as Ethan stood frozen, watching the woman he once discarded walk into his party with grace and dignity, he realized something he never wanted to admit. He hadn't invited her to humiliate her. He had invited her to remind himself that he'd won. But now, looking at her surrounded by love, it was painfully clear, she was the one who had truly won. Ethan's confident facade crumbled piece by piece as the afternoon wore on. The laughter that had once surrounded him now drifted elsewhere, to the corner where Clara stood, her 4 children giggling around her as guests gathered to meet them. The same people who had earlier praised Ethan and Lena were now whispering admiration for Clara's strength. Cameras subtly turned her way. Every moment that passed felt like a spotlight shifting off Ethan's carefully built life and onto the woman he'd once called useless. He clenched his jaw, watching as one of his friends, a man who'd once mocked Clara for her infertility, now knelt to high-five one of the little boys. They're adorable, the man said, smiling. You must be so proud. I am, Clara replied, her voice steady and warm. Each of them is a miracle. Ethan's chest tightened. The word, miracle, echoed in his mind like an accusation. He'd used to scoff at that word. During their marriage, he had been impatient, angry. Every failed treatment had become an insult to his ego. You're wasting time, he'd said more than once. I can't spend my life waiting for something that's never going to happen. He had left her for Lena before the divorce papers were even finalized. And now, here she was, proving that the impossible had simply needed faith, something he'd never had. Trying to regain control, Ethan strode toward Clara, his fake smile plastered on. So, he said, loud enough for others to hear, you finally became a mom. Congratulations. Must have been expensive. The tone was subtle, but the cruelty was there. A few guests exchanged uneasy looks. Clara didn't flinch. It was, she replied, her eyes locking on his. But worth every sleepless night, every tear, and every sacrifice. She tilted her head slightly. I went abroad for treatment, actually. The same doctor I once told you about, the one you said was a waste of money. Her words hit like a slap. Ethan's smile faltered, but she didn't stop. Funny thing, she continued, her voice calm and unshaken, you told me I'd never have a family. You were right about one thing, though, not with you. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Lena's face turned pale as she looked at her husband, realization dawning that the man beside her wasn't just proud, he was cruel. Ethan tried to recover, laughing awkwardly. Come on, Clara, no hard feelings, right? We've both moved on. Clara's gaze softened, but it wasn't forgiveness, it was pity. Oh, I moved on a long time ago, she said quietly. You see, pain teaches you what love really is. I had to lose everything before I could find myself again. Her words silenced the entire room. Even the music seemed to fade. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, feeling every eye on him. His perfect party had turned into a mirror reflecting everything he'd tried to hide. The arrogance, the guilt, the emptiness behind his success. Then one of Clara's children tugged her hand. Mommy, can we give her the gift? The little girl asked, pointing to Lena. Clara nodded. The girl walked up shyly and handed Lena a small, neatly wrapped box with a pink ribbon. For your baby, she said softly. Lena blinked, tears forming as she unwrapped it. Inside was a tiny knitted blanket, handmade with soft yarn. We made it, the little girl added proudly. Mommy helped. The crowd melted. Clara smiled gently at Lena. Every child deserves love, she said simply. There was no bitterness, no venom, just grace. Ethan stood frozen. His own guests were now looking at him differently, not as the successful husband or expectant father, but as the man who had once crushed the woman now standing tall before him. Clara glanced around once more, her hand resting protectively on her daughter's shoulder. I'm happy for you both, she said quietly. Truly. But I hope one day, you understand that real happiness isn't about winning, it's about healing. And as she turned away, the whispers began again. Not about Ethan's wealth or Lena's pregnancy, but about the woman who had walked through fire and come out shining. Ethan could only stand there, hollow and exposed, realizing too late that the one person he had tried to destroy had just shown the entire world what real strength looked like. As the sun dipped low and the music softened, Clara knew it was time to leave. She gathered her children, who were now sitting on the grass, eating cupcakes and laughing as if they were at any other happy party. Her heart swelled watching them, their laughter, their innocence, the way they looked at her with pure trust. That was everything she had ever wanted. No mansion, no money, no validation from anyone could compare. Across the garden, Ethan stood stiff and silent. The confidence he'd worn like armor all afternoon was gone, replaced by a raw discomfort he couldn't hide. His guests were no longer crowding around him. Instead, they whispered in corners, their eyes flicking between him and Clara. The energy had shifted completely. He had planned to humiliate her, but now he was the one everyone pitied. Clara rose gracefully, dusting off her dress. Her children followed, holding hands. As she approached the main table to say her goodbyes, the crowd parted instinctively. Even those who had once sided with Ethan now looked at her with admiration. Lena was standing near the cake, her eyes downcast, her hands resting on her belly. Clara stopped before her, her expression soft but unreadable. You have a beautiful home, she said kindly. And you're going to be a wonderful mother. Lena blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in her voice. Thank you, she whispered, her throat tight. Your children are amazing. Clara smiled faintly. They've been my greatest teachers. They taught me patience, courage, and forgiveness. She looked at Ethan then, not with anger, but with quiet finality. I forgive you, she said simply. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. The words hit him like thunder. His lips parted, but no sound came out. For a man who always had something clever to say, he suddenly had none. Clara's calm cut deeper than any insult ever could. Around them, the silence grew thick, broken only by the sound of children's laughter and the faint rustle of the wind through the decorations. One of Clara's sons tugged her hand. "Mommy, can we go home now?" he asked softly. She smiled down at him. "Yes, sweetheart, we're done here." As she turned to leave, a few guests began clapping quietly, hesitant at first, then louder. It wasn't for the party, or the hosts, but for her. For the dignity she carried, for the strength she embodied. Clara didn't need applause, but the gesture filled the air with something powerful, a recognition that the woman Ethan had tried to humiliate had just risen higher than he could ever reach. Ethan's face flushed as he tried to wave it off, pretending it didn't matter, but every clap echoed the truth. He was small, and she was infinite. Clara walked toward the gate with her children, the evening light casting long golden shadows behind them. The twins chattered about balloons and cupcakes, their tiny hands swinging in hers. She smiled, the weight of the past finally lifting from her shoulders. For years, she had carried the memory of his words, the cruelty, the rejection, the humiliation, like stones in her heart. But today, she had laid them all down. Behind her, the sound of the party faded. Ethan stood motionless, his guests drifting away one by one. Lena turned to him, her eyes cold and distant. "You invited her to hurt her," she said quietly, "but you only destroyed yourself." Then she walked away, leaving him surrounded by silence. Outside, Clara buckled her children into their seats, then paused for a moment before starting the car. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and rose. She glanced at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was strong, whole, and finally free. She whispered to herself, "This is my real family. My real happiness." As she drove off into the fading light, the mansion behind her seemed smaller, colder, just like the man who lived inside it. And for the first time in years, Clara felt light, untethered, and proud. She hadn't just survived Ethan's cruelty. She had conquered it.